The open road, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling under the pale moonlight, the hum of your engine, a lonely symphony in the stillness of the night. But be warned, for the darkness holds secrets, whispers of things unseen, unheard, and often unbelievable. Stories of vanished hitchhikers, phantom vehicles, and roads where logic seems to evaporate into the night. Because tonight we drive into the heart of darkness. Our first story takes us to a desolate stretch of highway in the American Southwest. It was a road well traveled by truckers, a black ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of barren desert. Our storyteller, a seasoned trucker named Jack, knew this road like the back of his hand. One night, under a sky choked with stars, Jack noticed a lone figure by the side of the road. It was a young woman, her thumb outstretched in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. Jack had a strict rule about picking up hitchhikers, but something about the woman's desolate figure tugged at his conscience. He pulled over. The woman was dressed in a simple cotton dress, her face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. She didn't speak, but her eyes, wide and shimmering in the darkness, spoke volumes of gratitude. Jack, a man of few words himself, simply gestured to the passenger seat. As they drove on, the silence in the cab became heavy, punctuated only by the crackling of the CB radio and the low hum of the engine. Jack tried to make small talk, asking the woman where she was headed, where she was from, but she remained unnervingly silent. He felt an unsettling chill creep up his spine, a sense of unease that he couldn't shake off. Finally, as dawn began to paint the sky with hues of purple and orange, the woman spoke. She pointed a slender finger towards a dirt road branching off the highway, her voice a mere whisper.
"Turn here," she said, her voice raspy as if unused for days.
Jack, relieved to finally have broken the silence, steered the truck onto the dirt road. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, dilapidated farmhouse, its windows dark and lifeless. The woman turned to Jack, a faint smile playing on her lips.
"This is it," she said, her voice still a whisper. "Thank you for the ride."
Before Jack could respond, she opened the passenger door and stepped out into the growing light. He watched as she walked towards the farmhouse, her figure becoming smaller and smaller until she finally disappeared through the front door. Jack decided to wait for a few minutes, a strange sense of foreboding settling over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Finally, he decided to check on the woman just to make sure she was okay. He got out of the truck and walked towards the farmhouse, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but the only response was the sound of his own heart pounding in his ears. Our next story takes us to the winding coastal roads of the Pacific Northwest. The air is thick with fog, and the only sound is the crashing of waves against the cliffs. Our storyteller, a young woman named Sarah, was driving home from a late shift at the hospital. The rain hammered against her windshield, blurring her vision as she navigated the treacherous curves of the highway. Her headlights cut through the thick fog, illuminating the deserted road ahead. That's when she saw her, a lone figure huddled on the side of the road, illuminated by the stark glare of her headlights. It was a woman, her clothes drenched, her face buried in her hands. Sarah, her heart filled with a familiar wave of empathy, pulled over. The woman looked up, her face a mask of fear and desperation. She was young, barely out of her teens, and her eyes were wide with a terror that sent chills down Sarah's spine.
"Please," the woman pleaded, her voice trembling. "Can you help me? My car broke down a few miles back and I can't get a signal on my phone."
Sarah, without hesitation, unlocked the passenger door, and the woman slid in, bringing with her the chill of the night and the scent of rain and fear. The woman, whose name Sarah learned was Emily, was shaking uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. Sarah, her instincts kicking in, wrapped her own jacket around the shivering woman, trying to calm her down.
It's okay, Sarah said, her voice soothing, trying to sound more confident than she felt. You're safe now. I'll get you help.
Emily, her breathing shallow and rapid, leaned back against the seat, her eyes darting nervously between Sarah and the dark road ahead. She gave a mumbled explanation of a car malfunction, a dead phone battery, and a growing fear of being alone on this deserted stretch of highway. Sarah, her mind focused on getting Emily to safety, tried to ignore the nagging feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of her stomach. As they drove, the rain intensified, transforming the road into a treacherous river of black ice and reflected headlights. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white, her eyes scanning the road ahead.
There's a diner up ahead, Sarah said, her voice a reassuring murmur in the darkness. We'll stop there, get you warmed up, and call for help.
They continued driving in silence, the only sound the relentless drumming of rain on the roof of the car and the low hum of the engine. The diner, a beacon of warmth and light, finally materialized out of the fog. Sarah pulled into the parking lot, relieved to have reached their destination.
We're here, she said, turning to Emily, a reassuring smile on her face.
But the passenger seat was empty. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. She whipped her head around, her eyes scanning the car's interior, but Emily was gone. Our final story takes us to a lonely stretch of highway that snakes its way through the heart of Appalachia. It's a road steeped in folklore, whispered to be haunted by the ghosts of those who met their untimely end within its winding curves.
I'd grown up hearing the tales whispered around campfires and late-night gatherings. I always dismissed them as spooky stories, nothing more than local legends designed to keep children in line and tourists away.
But tonight, as David drove home from a friend's house, the stories took on a chilling new meaning. The road was shrouded in an unnatural darkness, the trees lining the roadside appearing as gnarled claws reaching out towards him. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of his tires against the asphalt.
I tried to focus on the road, to push the stories to the back of my mind, but the silence, the oppressive darkness, it was getting to me. And then I saw it.
A figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by his headlights. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to another era. His face was obscured by the shadows, but David could sense his gaze, cold and penetrating, boring into him.
I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding dangerously on the asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath catching in my throat.
The figure remained motionless, its eyes locked on David, a silent sentinel in the darkness. The figure flickered, its form becoming translucent, then vanished completely. David was left staring at the empty road, his heart racing, his palms slick with sweat.
I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by the stories I'd heard. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and continued driving. But the feeling of unease that had settled over me refused to dissipate.
He could feel eyes on him, watching him from the darkness that pressed in on all sides. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and a shiver ran down his spine. He pressed on, his foot heavy on the accelerator, eager to reach the safety of his home.
As I rounded a sharp bend, my headlights illuminated another figure standing in the middle of the road. This time it was a woman, her long dark hair cascading down her back, her dress billowing around her as if caught in an unseen wind.
Her face, pale and drawn, was turned towards him, her eyes burning with an eerie, otherworldly light. David slammed on the brakes once more, his car skidding to a halt just inches from the apparition. He stared at the woman, his blood turning to ice in his veins.
She seemed to float above the road, her feet not quite touching the asphalt. The woman's lips moved, but no sound reached my ears. I could only stare in horror as she reached out towards me, her hand passing through the windshield as if it were nothing but air.
He felt a cold, clammy touch on his arm, and a voice, raspy and filled with an unspeakable sadness, whispered directly into his ear, "Turn back. This road is not meant for the living."
The woman's touch, the sound of her voice, it was all too real, too visceral. This was no trick of the light, no figment of my imagination.
David, his heart pounding in his chest, threw the car into reverse and backed away, his eyes never leaving the ghostly figure. He spun the car around, tires screaming in protest, and sped away, the image of the ghostly woman seared into his mind. He didn't look back, didn't slow down until he reached the familiar lights of his hometown. As the night deepens and the shadows grow longer, remember these tales of terror. The road can be a lonely and unforgiving place, especially after the sun dips below the horizon. Remember, the next time you find yourself driving alone at night, keep your eyes on the road and be aware of your surroundings. Stay safe out there and sweet dreams.